Today on the channel, it's a return of the Kyle Peterson Top 5, and today we're counting down my top 5 Sid figures of all time.
And the spirit of Ultimate Warrior will run forever!
Welcome everyone, Kyle here, and welcome back to the channel for another edition of the Kyle Peterson Top 5, a Thursday tradition here on the channel, as every single Thursday we're counting down my top 5 or top 10 favorites of something, and today, whether he be psycho, vicious, or out for justice, Big Sid is an all-timer in the wrestling landscape, especially if you are a 90s wrestling fan, and Big Sid is in the crosshairs today as we're counting down my top 5 Sid, vicious, justice, like I said, psycho Sid, all interchangeable in this video, so anything Sid ever did is up for grabs here in this top 5, and of course, these top 5 lists are always an interesting one. As I always do say, make sure you put your list in the comments down below, as this is my list, but Sid, be it in WCW, ECW, WWE, WWF, one of the greatest big men of the 90s, and one of those guys that stole my heart and never let go, as I saw him as a skyscraper as a little kid, and seeing moves like that powerbomb and seeing big dudes doing things like him, I could not believe my eyes. And when he joined up with the Four Horsemen, man, it was all in for me. It was huge time for me in my wrestling fandom, huge time for me in my Sid fandom as well. Of course, Sid later left WCW. We all know that story. If you don't, maybe you should look that up. Him and old Arn Anderson not getting along too well. And of course, him going over to the WWF at the time, starting a little bit of a feud with Hulk Hogan, a referee, we all remember that. And I would say Sid is one of those guys that had so much potential, and I don't know, you guys tell me in the comments, did he ever live up to that potential? I don't know. He fizzled out in WCW because of the whole incident with Arn Anderson. That really did hurt his career, obviously. Went to the WWF and really had a chance to be maybe possibly the next Hulk Hogan. Didn't quite work out for him. He, of course, went back to WCW during the Monday Night Wars for a little bit. He had another run, of course, in the WWF as Psycho Sid. I would say that's probably his best run of all time, being champion, feuding with Shawn Michaels, all that kind of stuff. That's probably the highlight of his career. He did go back to WCW, of course, had that gruesome industry there, but was a tip-top player over there. He also had a stint in ECW. We can't forget that one. So he's a guy that's been around, but always around a little bit of controversy kind of wherever he goes. There's always the joking about softball season, things like that. But Sid, no doubt about it, an all-time great big man, no doubt about it there. Didn't he have a stretcher match with Elegante back in the day? I think I was all in on that. And of course, looking back, as a little kid, you love stuff like that. I can just imagine I'd be like rolling my eyes at this point in time. But that's the magic of your childhood watching wrestling, that is for sure. So once again, this is Sid Top 5. Any incarnation of Sid is up for grabs on this one. Make sure you put your list in the comments down below. So here it is. Let's kick it off at number 5. All right, we begin the Sid Top 5 at number 5. And this one is a bit of a sleeper here. Might not be on a lot of lists. And this is possibly the most recent Sid figure I got in my collection. What is it? Well, we're going to the Galoob line. We're going back to WCW, but we're going for the giant Sid figure here. Now, if you guys have followed closely on the channel here, about a year ago, I want to say, give or take, maybe a little bit longer, I did find this along with the rest of the set at the Kane County Toy Show. Of course, the United States' biggest toy show in Chicago, 3 times a year. Another one's coming up fairly soon. Unfortunately, I'm going to miss the July event. But I did pick up that whole WCW line there. Old Eagle Eye David C. Anderson pointed it out to me and had to pick it up. Now, I definitely remember these as a kid. I was definitely more into the smaller figures, the Galoob figures, of course, when I was a kid. Couldn't get everything you wanted, so this was a line I just admired from afar. And I always kind of looked at these and said, what am I going to do? I don't know if I could really wrestle with these big of figures. Very similar to the giant LJNs back in the day of Hogan and Piper. But this Sid is so iconic to me. His old WCW. Like I said, that's where I really got into Sid. That's where I first saw him as a skyscraper. And then, of course, his time in the Horsemen. So that's what this represents to me. Whenever I see this outfit for Sid, it reminds me of those happy days of him in the Horsemen as a little kid, rooting along the old Horsemen team there. But a cool Sid, a cool figure here. Obviously very big. You got the giant WCW belt. I do think the head sculpt on this is pretty good, especially for the time on this one. But definitely cool. Almost like a statue is kind of how how I view these. I don't really view these as a wrestling figure I'm going to play with, like I said. This is more of like a statue piece here with some of the giant size figures. But definitely cool. A little bit shocked it's in my top 5, but when I went through all my Sid figures, this one just kept sticking at the 5 spot, and that's where it lands as of right now. So number 5, the old Sid giant-sized Galoob. Next up, we got the number 4 selection in the top 5 countdown here. And this number 4 figure, I'd have to do the math. I'd have to double check it. But this is possibly my most wanted basic figure that I would like to see made as an elite. And I do think there's got to be a time we get this in one of the SummerSlam waves, WrestleMania waves, Survivor Series waves, Legends waves, something like that. I think the day will come we will see an elite version of this. But as of right now, he's stuck as a basic. What is it? It is Sid Basic from his first run in the WWF. Of course, him throwing Hogan out at the Royal Rumble, we'll never forget that moment. Probably the biggest moment of that time as far as memory goes for me. I guess you could say his referee thing with the match with Hogan, Warrior, Slaughter, and all of them as well. But definitely an interesting Sid, a very cool Sid, a very iconic Sid. I believe this was also in an early Super Nintendo video game, if I'm not mistaken. I remember as a kid playing with this version of Sid as well. So just a definitely cool version here. Yes, it's a little plain Jane. It's just a guy in blue knee pads, a black armband, and then blue trunks. It's pretty plain Jane, but it is Sid. It is a defining version of Sid from that time frame. Would love to have it as an elite, as I did say. So very cool to have a basic on the list, especially at the number 4 spot. We've hit the halfway point in the countdown. You got your list together. Make sure you put it in the comments down below, and make sure you subscribe to this channel while you're at it. Like I said, every Thursday we're doing a countdown video, and we need your comments down below to see what your top 5 and top 10s are. But number 3, we're going to WWE, we're going to Mattel, we're going to the Elite line, we're going to Elite 86 for something really cool here. We got the 2-in-1 Sid figure. So Sid, another one that's really cool, is a 2-in-1 figure. You guys know, longtime viewers of the channel know, I love a 2-in-1 figure. I think it's a great idea for any toy line to do. Make people buy 2 of a figure, and that's exactly what this Elite 86 SummerSlam edition is. So you get Sid, of course, in the talked about referee outfit. You get the black pants, you get the zebra striped shirt. He's ready to referee. He's ready to call it down the middle. Or is he? Or is he? But definitely a cool looking one here. But then we get it. You take this all off. You get a WCW throwback Sid figure. Now, we talked about that giant size Galoob in the iconic black singlet. Of course, he wore that black singlet a lot, but he also wore this red one in his WCW time frame. So you get a little WWF version of Sid and a WCW version of Sid. Man, I'm here for that all day long. I would not be opposed for a repaint of this in a black singlet either. I think that would be a cool idea. I think you got to let a little time pass in between this one being out there. Maybe another year or 2 would be great, but I would love to see this one in black. It would be a great Legends figure. You throw something else in there, maybe a Horseman shirt. Who knows? You could put something in there, a new head. There's something they could do to give this figure a fresh paint of coat, as Bruce Pritchard would say. But I love the 2-in-1 aspect of this one. Of course, a very popular one, and one a lot of people were looking out for. There is a variant hair color edition of this one as well with a little blonder hair. These two here are the browner hair version. I do have the blonde one over there. But definitely awesome, definitely cool. I'm here all day for these 2-in-1 figures, and that's why this Sid hits in at number 3. We arrived at the number 2 spot in the top 5 countdown, and once again, we go to the WWF, WWE. We go to the Hasbro line back in the day for Hasbro Sid Justice. How about that one? An all-timer. As you guys know, I've talked about it on the channel before. LJN's Hasbro WCW Galoob. That was the height of my playing day. All the way up into the Bone Crunchers. Skip the Bendhams, of course. But this was the height of my playing day. So anytime you got a new Hasbro figure, and it wasn't like today, where you would just, see on the internet, this is coming in the future. Man, back then it was the surprise at the store. You'd just be waltzing into a Toys R Us on a Friday night, just had Pizza Hut for dinner. You're living the dream. Your dad said, hey, you get one figure. You were good this week. You get one figure this week. Which one are you going to pick out? You go to that wall, you see that Hasbro wall, and you see all these new figures, and you just melt right there in the aisle. You can't believe your eyes. Dad, they got all of them. I can't just get one. And I was very fortunate. My dad understood the art of collecting, and sometimes if you just passed it up, you might not see it again. And a lot of times say, all right, okay, we're going to get all of them. Let's just get this over with. Man, I'm here for that. And I kind of live by that rule to this day. Maybe that's part of the problem. Who knows? Never can say no to my kid on a Squishmallow either. But this Sid, very iconic for the time. Of course, coming off his famed WCW run where I was all in. I was loving his Galoob figure back in the day, and I was loving this one coming into my Hasbro Fed. Because, like a lot of kids, I tried and I went back and forth, but I did mix in my Galoobs and my Hasbros. Well, didn't have to do that anymore, as we did have an official Sid Hasbro figure. So very, very fun to have this one here. Always great to get a tippy-top main event big dude into your Fig Fed as a little kid. You know, that night he's going straight to the title. That's what was going to happen. And he had classic feuds with Ultimate Warrior and, of course, Hulk Hogan in my collection as a kid. So very memorable for me is this Hasbro Sid Justice. That's why he's coming in at number 2 in my top 5 list. But who is number 1? I think a lot of you guys could guess, but we'll talk about it. Up next, the number 1 Sid figure of all time. All right, we've hit the number 1 Sid figure of all time. Do you got your list together? Put it in the comments down below. Of course, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe on this very YouTube channel. Always does help the channel. And remember, every Thursday, we got top 5, top 10 countdown videos. But the number 1 figure, there was no doubt in my mind from the start, and this is the way it finished as number 1 for me as well. It was, of course, my first ever Sid figure. It was in the height of my Sid fandom. I don't know if Sid was ever a bigger superstar in my eyes than this moment here, and I had hours of entertaining playing with this figure. What is it? Of course, we're going to Galoob. We're going to the WCW Galoob Sid, of course, running wild with the Horsemen. And one of my favorite incarnations, definitely at the time, Sid, Arn, Rick, and Barry Windham. Man, that was an all-timer Horseman team. Of course, many years later as a teenager and things, going back, watching a lot of old tape of the Tully and Ole days. I mean, there's something to be said about that. But if you were just, you know, a little kid growing up during this time of the Four Horsemen, it was absolutely next level. You know, of course, you had Flair at the top of the house. You had the Enforcer, Arn. Barry Windham, possibly the greatest wrestler in that time frame. Barry was absolutely amazing, and I don't think he gets the credit he deserves for how good he was at the time. And then you had young Sid there, the big giant, the big muscle of the group. Just an absolute animal. The power bomb coming off the skyscrapers. Just a lot to like around this time. And of course, having action figures going along with what you're seeing on TV. So many WCW Saturday Night episodes. I sat there the whole time with my Galoobs, had my Galoob ring going. Just living the little kid dream playing with my action figures. And Sid was such a big part of that as a little kid. And I talked about it earlier. I did cross this one over into my Hasbros. There was times where I would say, okay, it's going to be joined. I'm going to use the Hasbros and Galoobs together. I didn't like to do it. I didn't like to, but I felt like I had no choice. I needed the Stinger and the Ultimate Warrior to team up. I needed all kinds of stuff like that going on, so I'd go back and forth. But Sid was a big part of that as well. Then, of course, we talked about number 2, Hasbro getting a Sid figure, really changing the game there. Didn't have to cross him over anymore. But love this. And it's always crazy because you're a little kid, you just don't know any different. But all these years later, if I showed this to my kids, they'd be like, well, how do you play with this? There's no bendability or anything. At least CLJNs had a little bit bend to them. These were hard plastic. Almost reminds you of a cake topper for a birthday cake. But man, you used your imagination. You did it. He had great clotheslines, elbows. Of course, the power bomb. He'd do the torture rack from time to time. You could do the leg drop with him. There was a lot. Of course, you're a kid. You use your imagination. That's the way it does go. But Sid, man, he was ruling the world. He was ruling the world in my figure fed for the WCW line, no doubt about it. Just an all-timer, an all-time iconic one for me. There was no doubt this was coming in at number 1, and that's where he did stay. Now, there is, of course, a variant of this one, a UK exclusive, all there in the red. Man, one of these days, I have the Freebirds, but I need to track down the rest of those. I've been wanting to do it for years. It's just pricing has gotten out of control, but it is on my to-do list. I really want that Elegante, really want that Dustin Rhodes as well. Big Josh would be a good one. I'd love to have that, but of course the axe handle missing. Would love the Sting variants as well. I want them all, and I will. One of these days, hopefully I'll come across that. Maybe I'll figure it out one day down the line. But one day down the line is now for Sid. This is the number 1 Sid figure of all time. Once again, put your list in the comments down below. Be interested to see where you do come in. It'd be interesting, of course, in the age bracket. Some of them might like some of the elite figures as number 1, but if you're an old timer like me, you like stuff like this. So let me know in the comments down below. Like I always say, like, comment, subscribe to this whole video. Don't forget about the Patreon for early access to videos like this one. You also get bonus content, exclusive content, all kinds of stuff on the Patreon. And the Patreon is, of course, the best way to support this fair YouTube channel. You can also support the channel over at ProWrestlingTees.com. Search Kyle Peterson. Don't forget social media. SirPaul64 on Twitter, Instagram, _Kyle_Peterson. So for Sid, I'm Kyle. See you guys all real soon.